Welcome to the course again. Today we are going to cover modules 1 and 2. Module 1 focuses on key concepts, theories and definitions of science, technology and innovation. Then in module 2, we are going to focus on concepts of policy, the policy process, science, technology, and innovation policy, and what we call policy instruments. So I'm going to begin with the module 1. In module 1, the themes that we focus on are what is science and why does science matter? What is technology? We'll discuss the role of technology in development. We'll then focus on innovation, what it is, the innovation process, and the concept of national system of innovation. I'll try to explain what a national system of innovation is and why it is a useful conceptual approach in policy making. I'll end module 1 by briefly looking at the interactions or interrelationships of science, technology, and innovation, how science, technology, and innovation are interrelated. And I'm going to emphasize that these relationships or interrelationships are not linear. They are quite complex, so that we don't think that one can move from science to developing technology to innovation. So the relationships are quite complex and non-linear. What is science and why does science matter? In our daily lives, we use this word science. In fact, the term is used not just by academics, by researchers, but literally by everybody. The word is out in the public. Very often it's misused. It's not very often well defined. It is subject to actually abuse and misuse. So what is science? There is a tendency to talk of science. Science is about creativity. So sometimes people talk about creativity and confuse it with science. Science has been defined in many ways, but it's largely about the study of nature and natural things. It's about the inquiry into nature and natural things. It is about why things exist the way they do, why things work the way they work. So I just want to emphasize that science, first and foremost, is about the study of nature, inquiry into nature and natural things. So you can study the air. You can study the atmosphere. You can study an ecosystem, what an ecosystem is composed of, how an ecosystem evolves, the importance of an ecosystem. So it's the inquiry into nature and natural things. It's largely about the production of new knowledge. It's largely about the production of new knowledge. So science about nature, studying nature. Out of that studying, you produce new knowledge. you get to understand nature, you produce knowledge about nature. So you get to know about nature. Very often we talk of research and development, but let me just emphasize research. In the literature that we recommended to you, you will find out that research is actually science in action. Research is the conduct of science. I've made reference to one important publication, one important book on science, what science is, by John Zeman, Real Science, what it is and what it means. In that book, science is defined as the production of knowledge, generating knowledge, actual observations, and theories. Zeman talks of different forms of science, different forms of knowledge. So let's appreciate that science is really inquiry into nature and natural things. It's about the production of knowledge, and the exercise, the conduct of science is largely referred to, or is commonly referred to as research. Science is very critical for a wide range of reasons. A wide range of reasons, as we said, it's about production of knowledge. It enables society to build understanding of nature and natural things, particularly problems. Because of science, we are able to inquire into and build understanding of problems, societal problems, such as pandemics, COVID-19, climate change. It's because of science, it's because of the conduct of science, the practice of science, which is research, that we are able to understand these societal problems. The other reason why science is very important is because science can also be used to actually build capabilities. People can be trained on research. They are trained to become researchers. But there are other reasons why science is important. The literature, you'll come across a number of other reasons why countries invest in science. Other reasons include just science for its own sake. You produce knowledge for its own sake. Some countries invest in science for prestige. They want to be prestigious. You want to have Nobel prizes. And there are countries that have deliberate policies to invest in science for prestige. You'll again come across this in the literature. There are countries that invest in science to solve problems, as we've said, to become competitive. They invest in science for military purposes, security. So a wide range of why science matters. But for our purposes in this course, I just want to emphasize that science is very critical because it produces knowledge about problems, builds our understanding of specific problems, and with that understanding, we are able to solve problems. So that's really what science is and why it matters. What is technology? Technology is another widely used term. Everybody talks about technology. sometimes we tend to confuse technology with the other things. So if I ask you what is technology, you are likely to put out your cell phone and say, this is the technology, or some hardware or some equipment. And we tend to narrowly define technology around hardware and equipment. But technology is more than that. Technology generally is the application of knowledge, the application of science. Technology is actually science in practice. Technology is the embodiment of science. Knowledge is embodied in hardware, and more important, software. They know how, and sometimes they know why. So let's appreciate that technology is not just machinery or just hardware, but it's the application of knowledge, the application of science, and it's about that knowledge embodied in hardware and software, and out of the application of knowledge, which is technology, we produce goods and services. We produce products and processes. So that's what technology is about. The concept of innovation, which is gaining currency. You go everywhere these days, everybody talks about innovation. And there's a tendency to actually equate or reduce innovation to technology. So people talk about innovation, but actually sometimes they are meaning they talk about innovation when they are referring to technology. Again, if I ask you what is innovation, you are likely to lift your cell phone or some piece of equipment and say, this is the technology. This is innovation. But innovation is more than technology. Innovation is not technology, and innovation is also not science. Sometimes people talk about innovation as if it is science. Innovation is not R&D. Innovation is generally defined as the introduction and application of new products, practices, processes, services into social or economic space. That space can be a country, a company, an enterprise, or even a community, to create some value. And that value may be economic value, may be social value. So let's appreciate that innovation is not science or technology, or science and technology. Innovation is about the introduction and application of new products, processes, practices, and services. Now, the word new here is important. It may be new to a company, a particular company, but it's not new to all companies. It may be new to in one country or a community, but it's old in the rest of the world. So it's the introduction of products, practices, processes in a particular space. It did not exist. It's the application of these products, practices, processes, and services, which are largely technologies into space, social and or economic space, with the purpose of creating value. So that's what innovation is all about. Innovation is not a technology. Sometimes we casually talk of my innovation, when we're talking about a particular technology, but my innovation should be about acquiring, introducing, and applying a particular technology, a particular process. We also talk of different forms of innovation. In the literature, you'll come across different typologies of innovation. You talk of technological or technical innovations, and non-technical, non-technological innovations, organizational innovations. You'll also come across the notion of social innovations, which is organizational innovations. So that's what innovation is. Let's not confuse innovation with the technology. Let's not confuse innovation with science. The innovation process, innovation does not just happen out of the blue. It doesn't just drop from heaven. There is a process which is about the acquisition of a particular product or practice or process, introducing that into the economy, into a company, getting that diffused into that space, a company, a community, or a country, and then applying that into the space. So it's a non-linear process that involves the production of knowledge, which we said is again science, the use of knowledge, which is technology, the diffusion, adaptation, and application of knowledge and or technologies into space. So I just want to emphasize that the process is non-linear, in the sense that you don't have to start with research, then you develop a technology, then you introduce it into the economy. No, in some case, you don't have to do that. You'll find that the technology already exists, you procure it, you introduce it, and you start applying it in your society, country, or company. So you don't have to do research to innovate. Just emphasizing again that innovation is a social process. It is not a mechanical process, really about interactions. You will have researchers produce knowledge, and that process of knowledge production, as John Zeman in Real Science emphasizes, that is a social process. No individual just does it on his or her own. Very often you have individuals organized in certain ways, socializing to produce knowledge, to apply that knowledge, and then get that knowledge introduced and applied in economies, in countries, in society. So it's a social, really dynamic process. That's what the innovation process is all about. Then the concept of national system of innovation, which again you'll find widely used in the literature and policy documents. There is very often also abused, misused, not just in academic spheres, but in policy and public ways in general. The national system of innovation, what is it? Again, just one can play around with words, but you know that a system is anything that is not in chaos. A system has some order. A system has components. And the order is obtained because there is articulation, there is communication, flow of information, interactions. That's what makes a system. Then we've defined what innovation is as the introduction of products, processes, practices into space. So a system of innovation is largely about these interactions of institutions in both public and private sectors to initiate, to import, to modify, to diffuse new technologies. Christopher Freeman, who is one of the, actually those who came up with this concept of national system of innovation in his work, particularly in his study 1987, which is one of the references that I will give to you, defines a system of innovation, a national system of innovation as a network of institutions in the public and private sectors whose activities and interactions initiate, import, modify, and diffuse new technologies. So you can define initiate here to mean about developing new technologies, importing new technologies. They may be, they may have been developed elsewhere, but you import them into your economy. You modify them and then you diffuse them. So it's this network of institutions that do those activities. Network of institutions in both public and private sectors. So you can conceive of your national system of innovation, for example, in covering R&D institutes that are connected to technology development agencies in public and private sectors that are connected to financing bodies. You are finding mechanisms that are connected to policy bodies. Later on, just in a short while, I'll give you some illustration of what a system of innovation is. I want to emphasize that this system of innovation, a national system of innovation, first of all, is an open system. It's not a closed system. To import, modify, and diffuse new technologies, the system must be open. And the flexibility and dynamic nature of a system of innovation are largely determined by openness. This system has actors, again, as we said, in both public and private sectors. There are also routines and norms, policies and regulations, very important part of a system of innovation. When we talk of institutions, there are two types of institutions. You have the normative kind of institutions. That's where you have your routines, norms, your policies, regulations, and laws. But you also have the agency type of institutions, your organizations. So this network of institutions has two facets: the normative ones and the agency type ones, organizations. I want to emphasize that let's treat a national system of innovation as a dynamic one. It is a social system. It's about these interactions, networking. Networking is a social activity. There is exchange of information, learning, exchange of knowledge. Now, a system of innovation is also built on certain social virtues. And you, again, in the literature, you will find some discussion of certain virtues, social virtues, such as trust. Trust is very important to a system of innovation. It's one of the pillars of a system of innovation. In the absence of trust, or where you have low trust, you don't have a dynamic system of innovation. In the absence of trust, you don't find networks, enduring networks of institutions, whether in public or private sectors, or even within public sector. Trust is one of the social virtues. Because of trust, you are able to share information, knowledge, to exchange, to diffuse technologies. Just to emphasize again, you'll find this in the literature that we recommended, that innovation and the innovation process is about solving particular problems. So emphasis on addressing problems. And the national system of innovation is there to solve problems in the innovation process. It's there to ensure that knowledge is produced, diffused, is applied. And that's why you require a system of innovation. Without a system of innovation, or at least a dynamic system of innovation, you'll produce knowledge, but you'll not get that knowledge applied into new technologies to solve specific problems. And again, the emphasis here is on the demand side as opposed to the supply side. The supply side, which could be a science push or a technology push, where you just produce knowledge for its own sake, science for science's sake. And I have again emphasized that a national system of innovation is about the flow of technology information among people, private enterprises, public institutions. It's about interactive learning in relationships of these actors, whether in public or private sectors, or between public and private sectors. Again, the literature will find this being emphasized. Is really about interactive learning and learning relationships, exchange of technology, exchange of information, exchange of knowledge among people, and it is a social system of innovation. Just some illustration. It's a very simplistic one. We talked about a system of innovation comprising of these three facets. You have the actors in the public sector, you have actors in the private sector, but you also have these norms, the normative facet or aspect of institution, the laws, policies, regulations. These interact within public and private sectors. They interact among themselves, so policies and laws interact to make it possible for actors in public and private sectors to exchange information, to engage in learning, interactive learning, so that they're able to develop, introduce, diffuse, and apply technology, largely products, processes, and services as well. So let me just go back again. We've defined what science is, what technology is, and what innovation is. We've hopefully made it clear that the science, technology, and innovation do not just exist out there, or are not just conducted or developed out there. They are within a certain space, and one can think of a country, a nation, which is an open space where various actors interact to develop, to introduce, to imitate, to apply technologies. So that we've defined that, but the relationships between science, technology, and innovation, or among these three, are very important to understand. As I said earlier on, there's this tendency to talk of STI, science, technology, and innovation, as if, in fact, you move from science, then to technology, then to innovation in some linear way. No, they are interrelated in very complex ways. Sometimes innovation actually stimulates science or research, the production of knowledge. It stimulates the development of new technologies, and these relationships are not linear. They are quite complex. As we know, technology is often an outcome of accumulated knowledge, application of accumulated knowledge, application of science as we defined. But technology, you will appreciate, it also stimulates science, makes science to happen, particularly in modern times. Technological developments or technological change is a major driver of scientific advances with information and communication technologies. So you have technology-driven science. It's not just science that drives technologies. It's important to emphasize this. Again, I want to repeat that science does not automatically produce innovations or technologies for that matter. Innovations and the innovation activities are not necessarily preceded by scientific research or prior technological, are not dependent on prior technological developments. So the relationships are quite complex, and it's important for us to appreciate this when we start talking about policy, STI policy, science, technology, innovation policy. We need to appreciate this so that we don't get into the habit of creating these linear relationships. Just some points to emphasize from a recent book by Susan Boras and Charles Edquist. The title of the book is Holistic Innovation Policy. They emphasize in that book that scientific knowledge, science, may lead to inventions which are not innovations, but those inventions have to be transformed into innovations. They have to be procured, deployed, introduced, diffused, and applied in certain economic or social spaces to solve problems. And problems may be societal problems, COVID-19, the pandemic, or HIV and AIDS. There may be environmental problems such as climate change, the loss of biological diversity. There may be problems to do with the unemployment, so innovations to stimulate growth so as to create new jobs. So the goal of innovation is not just an abstract goal. There must be a purpose. And when we discussed why countries invest in R&D or science, we talked of societal problems, addressing societal problems, or building our understanding of nature and natural things. And through that, we are able to apply that knowledge embodied in technologies to solve particular problems. And Boras and Edquist emphasize that innovations themselves are not very interesting, but their consequences, their impacts are quite important. Now, I'm going to pause there again and just emphasize that STI, science, technology, and innovation, do not have internal logic to solve problems. It is how and or whether they are applied. Their mere existence, technologies will not solve a problem. Innovation, which is the process, the innovation process, does also not have predetermined or preordained logic that is going to solve problems. Again, it depends on the national system of innovation, the policies, the laws, the regulations to guide innovation in a particular pathway to address problems. So you may find innovation actually causing harm in certain instances. We talk of disruptive innovations, disruptive technologies, because the outcomes, the impacts are not predetermined as such. So I want to end the first module at that. I hope you'll appreciate this concept, which we generally use. We need to carefully define them. We need to have conceptual clarity so that we are able to apply these concepts properly in public policy making in different ways. So thank you very much. That's the end of our first module. We'll go back to some of these issues. I encourage you to read the literature that we've recommended to you, and there is a lot to read about these concepts, the interrelationships, why they are important. We also want to appreciate that these concepts are again subject to misuse and abuse. Therefore, careful definition and application is important. We've recommended at least 4 reading material for you for this model, but there's a lot. There's a lot more than that. In the course of in the course of time, over the next days or so, we'll be sending to you some literature. Some of it you might not easily access, but what the recommended reading material you can actually access that easily.